In the bitter cold of northern Montana, where temperatures plunge to 20 below zero, the winter's fury transforms the landscape into a beautiful yet deadly expanse. A German shepherd named Max had always been the perfect companion to Forest Ranger Ryan Blackwood. But one December morning, everything changed. Ryan noticed something unsettling about his loyal German shepherd. For 4 days straight, Max refused to enter his heated doghouse, choosing instead to sleep in the deadly cold, standing guard over something he wouldn't let his owner near while his fur collecting frost. When Ryan finally approached the doghouse to investigate, he was shocked. What could possibly make a domesticated companion defend a territory against his own master? What secret was hidden inside that simple wooden structure that was worth enduring the deadly Montana winter? What followed wasn't just tolerance. It was trust, built paw by paw and heartbeat by heartbeat. This is a story of unlikely alliances formed in the face of impossible odds, of sacrifice that transcends species. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Ryan Blackwood pulled his wool hat lower over his ears as the cold wind whistled through the pines surrounding his modest cabin in the mountains of northern Montana. Winter had settled into the valley like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it record-breaking low temperatures and snowfall that transformed the landscape into a treacherous, albeit beautiful, frozen wilderness. "Max, come on, boy," Ryan called, his breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air. He stomped his boots on the porch, knocking off clumps of snow while scanning the yard for his loyal companion of 7 years. The German shepherd was usually waiting at the door after Ryan's 12-hour shifts at the ranger station. But for the past 3 days, Max had been acting strangely. He'd been spending most of his time near his doghouse at the edge of the clearing, reluctant to come inside even during the worst of the blizzard that had blanketed the region. When Max finally emerged from behind the woodpile, Ryan's concern deepened. The dog's thick coat was dusted with snow, and he looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept properly in days. Yet there was an unusual alertness in his amber eyes, a vigilance that Ryan recognized from their years together patrolling the wilderness. "What's going on with you, buddy?" Ryan murmured, kneeling to ruffle the fur around Max's neck. The dog leaned into his touch briefly before pulling away, turning his head toward his doghouse with a low whine. Ryan followed Max's gaze. The custom-built doghouse, an insulated wooden structure Ryan had constructed himself, stood partially obscured by drifting snow. Though Max rarely used it, preferring the comfort of Ryan's cabin, the doghouse provided shelter during the day when Ryan was working. "You hungry?" Ryan asked, heading inside to prepare Max's dinner. Through the kitchen window, he observed his dog trotting back to the doghouse, sitting protectively about 10 feet away, his posture rigid and watchful. After setting down Max's food bowl on the porch, Ryan grabbed his flashlight and trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the doghouse. He'd barely covered half the distance when Max darted between him and the structure, hackles raised, emitting a warning growl that stopped Ryan in his tracks. "Max? What the hell?" Ryan stared in disbelief. In 7 years, Max had never once growled at him. The dog continued blocking his path, not aggressive but clearly determined. In the beam of Ryan's flashlight, Max's eyes reflected an unmistakable message: "Stay away." Ryan retreated, baffled and slightly hurt by his companion's behavior. Throughout the evening, he watched from the window as Max remained outside, occasionally approaching the doghouse cautiously before returning to his vigilant position, seemingly standing guard in the falling snow. By morning, Ryan's concern had escalated to alarm when he found Max still outside, curled in a ball near the woodpile, his fur covered in a thin layer of fresh snow. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero overnight. "That's it," Ryan muttered, pulling on his heavy winter gear. Something was obviously wrong, and he needed to find out what. Armed with a broom for protection and a package of thawed venison from last season's hunt, Ryan approached the doghouse again. This time, when Max intercepted him with another warning growl, Ryan was prepared. He tossed several chunks of meat far to the left of the doghouse. Max hesitated, clearly torn between guarding the structure and investigating the offering. It was then that Ryan noticed movement at the entrance of the doghouse, a tawny shape slipping partially into view before retreating back inside. His heart rate quickened. Bear? No, too small. Coyote, maybe. When Max finally moved toward the meat, Ryan seized his opportunity. In 3 long strides, he reached the doghouse and cautiously peered inside, bracing himself for an attack. What he saw made him recoil in shock. Amber eyes glared back at him from the shadows, not Max's friendly gaze, but the fierce, untamed stare of a bobcat. The wild feline was crouched defensively in the back corner of the doghouse, ears flattened, lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Ryan backpedaled quickly, nearly tripping over his own feet. A bobcat had taken over Max's shelter. This explained his dog's strange behavior. But why would Max allow a predator to occupy his territory? And more importantly, why would he protect the intruder from Ryan? Over the next 2 days, a bizarre standoff ensued. The bobcat refused to abandon the doghouse, and Max refused to abandon his post. Ryan tried several tactics to evict the wild animal safely, setting up an alternative shelter nearby, playing recordings of predator sounds, even calling a wildlife expert from the Park Service for advice. Nothing worked. The expert, Tom Hardison, an old friend and colleague, had laughed when Ryan explained the situation over a staticky phone connection. "Sounds like you've got yourself a stubborn one," Tom had said. "Female, I'm guessing. This time of year, if she's not budging, there might be kittens involved." The possibility hadn't occurred to Ryan. Bobcat kittens in December? It was unusual, but not unheard of. Late litters sometimes happened, though the winter survival rate was tragically low. With this new theory in mind, Ryan developed a more cautious approach. If there were indeed kittens, separating them from their mother or forcing them into the elements would be a death sentence. On the 4th morning, Ryan woke before dawn and watched from the cabin window as the bobcat slipped out of the doghouse and disappeared into the woods, presumably to hunt. Max, exhausted from his vigilant guard duty, had finally succumbed to sleep, curled up in the snow about 15 feet from the doghouse. This was Ryan's chance. Bundled against the cold, he moved quietly through the pre-dawn darkness, careful not to wake Max. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero during the night, and Ryan's concern for potential bobcat kittens outweighed his caution. Kneeling in the snow outside the doghouse, Ryan aimed his flashlight into the small entrance and peered inside. What he saw made his breath catch. Nestled in the back of the shelter, in a makeshift nest of dog blankets and shed fur, lay 4 tiny bobcat kittens. Their spotted coats were barely visible beneath a protective covering of Max's bedding. The kittens, no more than a few days old, were blind and helpless, huddled together for warmth in their mother's absence. "Oh my God," Ryan whispered, understanding flooding through him like a wave. Max hadn't been driven from his shelter. He had surrendered it willingly. For 4 days and nights, in temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, the German Shepherd had stood guard over a wild mother and her vulnerable offspring, sacrificing his own comfort and safety for theirs. Movement behind him made Ryan turn. Max was awake, watching him intently, no longer growling but clearly concerned about Ryan's proximity to his charges. "You incredible animal," Ryan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been protecting them all this time." As if understanding, Max approached cautiously, sniffing at Ryan's hand before looking toward the doghouse entrance. There was such intelligence in the dog's eyes, such purpose, that Ryan felt humbled by the depth of compassion his companion was capable of. Ryan retreated to the cabin, mind racing. The situation was precarious. The mother bobcat would return soon, and he had no desire to be caught near her kittens. Yet he couldn't bear the thought of Max spending another night in the deadly cold, especially now that he understood his dog's sacrifice. By mid-morning, Ryan had formulated a plan. Working quickly in his workshop, he constructed a second shelter using plywood and insulation materials he had on hand. He positioned it about 20 yards from Max's doghouse, concealed behind a stand of young pine trees where the mother bobcat would feel secure. Inside the new shelter, Ryan placed heating pads powered by a long extension cord running from the cabin. He lined the floor with soft blankets and added a protective covering over the entrance to block the wind. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to convince the mother bobcat to relocate her family to safer quarters. The transfer would be the dangerous part. Ryan couldn't risk moving the kittens himself. The mother might abandon them if they carried human scent. Instead, he would need to create a situation where she would move them on her own. When the bobcat returned from hunting around noon, Ryan watched from a distance as she slipped back into the doghouse, giving Max a wide berth. The German Shepherd, seemingly understanding some unspoken agreement between them, allowed her passage before resuming his guard position. Ryan's opportunity came after nightfall. With Max safely inside the cabin, fed, and finally resting near the wood stove, Ryan implemented his plan. Using a remote-controlled speaker he sometimes employed to deter problem bears, he placed it near Max's doghouse and retreated to watch from the cabin window. When he activated the speaker, playing the recorded sounds of a male bobcat, a potential threat to kittens, the reaction was immediate. The female emerged from the doghouse, kittens dangling one by one from her mouth, exactly as Ryan had hoped. With practiced efficiency, she transported her litter through the snow, instinctively heading for the concealed shelter Ryan had prepared, perhaps drawn by the promising warmth it offered against the brutal cold. Ryan watched, heart pounding, as she investigated the new structure cautiously before disappearing inside with her last kitten. Minutes passed, then an hour. She didn't emerge again, apparently accepting the new refuge. Only when he was certain the transfer was complete did Ryan finally release the breath he'd been holding. His gamble had paid off. The next morning, Max reclaimed his doghouse, though not before inspecting it thoroughly. Ryan cleaned it out, replacing the old bedding with fresh blankets, praising his dog continuously for his extraordinary behavior. "You're one of a kind, you know that?" he told Max, who seemed pleased to have his shelter back but still cast occasional glances toward the stand of pines where the bobcat family had relocated. Over the following weeks, as January's grip tightened around the Montana wilderness, Ryan observed a remarkable relationship unfold. The bobcat mother, whom he'd named Sierra, gradually became accustomed to his presence, watching warily from a distance as he left food near her shelter. Max, for his part, continued his self-appointed role as protector, regularly checking on the bobcat family during his daily patrols of the property. Sometimes, in the early mornings or late evenings, Ryan would spot Max sitting near the pine trees, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly keeping watch. Occasionally, Sierra would emerge, acknowledging the dog's presence with a slow blink before disappearing back into the shelter with her growing kittens. By February, the kittens had become more adventurous, tumbling out of their shelter on sunny afternoons to play in the snow under their mother's vigilant eye. Ryan documented their progress with his camera from the cabin porch, careful never to approach too closely. Tom Hardison from the Park Service visited twice, equally fascinated by the unusual arrangement. "I've been working with wildlife for 30 years, he told Ryan during his second visit, "and I've never seen anything like this. That dog of yours has adopted a family of wild predators. It's unprecedented." "He recognizes vulnerability," Ryan replied, watching as Max patrolled the perimeter of the clearing, giving Sierra and her kittens space while keeping other potential threats at bay. "I think he knew they wouldn't survive without shelter." "Still," Tom said, shaking his head in amazement, "most domestic dogs would see a bobcat as competition or a threat. The fact that he not only tolerated her presence but actively protected her and her kittens. It's extraordinary." As March arrived, bringing slightly warmer temperatures and the first tentative signs of spring, Ryan began to prepare himself for the inevitable departure of the Bobcat family. Sierra's kittens were growing rapidly, their spotted coats thickening, their movements becoming more coordinated and precise as they practiced hunting skills on fallen leaves and twigs. The separation, when it finally came, was both expected and surprisingly emotional. Ryan woke one morning in late March to find Max sitting at attention on the porch, his gaze fixed on the pine trees. The door to the Bobcat shelter stood open, the interior empty. Sierra had moved her family on, likely to establish a proper territory now that her kittens were strong enough to travel. Max seemed to understand, though he continued checking the empty shelter for several days, sometimes lying nearby as if hoping for their return. Ryan found himself doing the same, scanning the tree line each morning, feeling an unexpected sense of loss. "They needed to go, buddy," he told Max, scratching behind the dog's ears as they sat together on the porch steps. "They belong out there, living the way they're supposed to live." 3 days later, as dusk settled over the valley, Ryan spotted movement at the edge of the clearing. Sierra emerged from the trees alone, her tawny coat almost invisible against the brown undergrowth of early spring. She paused, seeming to survey the cabin and surrounding area, before focusing her attention on Max, who had risen to his feet, tail wagging slightly. For a long moment, the wild feline and domestic canine regarded each other across the distance, natural adversaries who had formed an improbable alliance. Then Sierra did something that left Ryan speechless. She approached Max slowly, stopping just a few feet away, and lowered herself to a sitting position. There was nothing submissive in her posture. Rather, she conveyed a dignified acknowledgement, one predator recognizing another. Max remained still, his usual exuberance tempered by what Ryan could only describe as respect. No growls, no bristling fur, just quiet acceptance of Sierra's presence. After what seemed like minutes, but was probably only seconds, Sierra rose and retreated to the tree line. Before disappearing into the gathering darkness, she paused for one final glance back at the cabin, at Max, at the shelter that had saved her family. Then she was gone, melting into the forest like a ghost. "Well, I'll be damned," Ryan murmured, blinking back unexpected moisture from his eyes. He wasn't a sentimental man by nature, but witnessing that silent exchange between two creatures from such different worlds had touched something deep within him. Throughout that spring and into the summer, Ryan occasionally spotted Sierra in the distance during his patrols of the park. Once, he even glimpsed 2 half-grown kittens trailing behind her along a remote ridgeline. Though she never again approached the cabin directly, Ryan sometimes found evidence of her presence, tracks in the mud near the creek, or once, remarkably, a freshly killed rabbit left at the edge of the clearing. Perhaps a gesture of reciprocity. Max always seemed to know when she had been nearby, raising his nose to the wind and standing at attention, surveying the trees with keen interest. The unexpected bond between them had changed something in the German Shepherd. He became more attuned to the wilderness around them, more patient in his observations, as though Sierra had awakened some dormant wild instinct within his domesticated heart. As for Ryan, the winter's extraordinary events had shifted something in him as well. Having witnessed such selfless compassion from his canine companion, he found himself viewing the natural world with renewed humility and respect. The arbitrary boundaries between wild and tame, between natural enemies and unlikely allies, seemed less fixed than he had once believed. When visitors to the ranger station asked about the best wildlife viewing spots, Ryan would share information about elk migrations and eagle nesting sites. But he kept the story of Max and Sierra to himself, a private reminder that in the harshest of circumstances, compassion could emerge from the most unexpected sources. On particularly cold nights, Ryan would often find Max sitting at the window, gazing out at his doghouse and the stand of pines beyond. During these moments, Ryan would place a hand on his dog's broad back, sharing in the quiet vigilance, both of them watching and waiting. For what, exactly, neither could say. Perhaps they were simply acknowledging the unlikely lesson they had learned together. That true strength lies not in dominance or territory, but in recognizing vulnerability and offering shelter against the storm, even to those we have been taught to fear. And if, on the coldest nights of the following winter, Max occasionally abandoned his comfortable place by the wood stove to resume his post near the pine trees, Ryan never questioned it. Some promises he had come to understand transcended species and seasons, connecting us to one another in ways that defied explanation but demanded respect. In the vast wilderness of northern Montana, where life and death played out with unforgiving regularity, a domestic dog had chosen compassion over comfort, protection over self-preservation. And in doing so, he had not only saved a family of wild creatures, he had taught his human companion the most profound lesson of all, that the capacity for kindness existed even in the unlikeliest of circumstances, waiting only for the opportunity to emerge. When the first snow of the next winter began to fall, Ryan built a new shelter and placed it in the stand of pines. Max watched approvingly from the porch, his posture alert, ready as always to stand guard if needed. Ryan understood now that some connections, once formed, never truly disappeared. They simply waited, patient and enduring, like the wilderness itself.